There are multiple ways in deviation, that is, to become disassociated from the universal spectrum of process. Now, to define universal is, again, becoming irresponsible to the deviating pattern, but so much that it would be defined as the broader spectrum in which one is participating, whether system, whether social forum, whether familial space. The deviating pattern can incur for multiple reasons. We're going to list them in understanding both in how they arrive and how they follow through and in how they finally become integrated into the broader system. The first is geographical distance. This is something that is paramount of understanding, that geographical location is not only the habituation of each arena, but is also the disparaging distance between civilized and social process itself. One is acclimating based on a geographical environment according to the individual and perceptual approaches, but they are doing so based on a distance factor of another geographical location. Now, of course, we are advocating that the geographical spectrum is hierarchical, and there is a division in which there is a centermost piece that is thus distanced to its marginalized receptacles. However, this does not mean that there is merely a single most geographical location in which all is in proximity towards. It is simply the understanding that one's habituation of geographical location is, in its way, related to its distant proportion of what is more than it, but not less than it. We do not study the geographical location for what could become more distant from it, but in how it relates to what is more prominent than it. Take, for instance, a house in which the geographical location of the centermost piece, the living room, is in connection to what is receptacle of it. And so this applies to all geographical distance. Because of that, an automatic ascension towards this deviation is when there is more geographical distance. Whatever is defined as more and whatever is defined as marginalized in that context. It is not a deviation of persona or individuality as one may assume. It is a deviation of their acclimation of geographical distance. Thus, there is a deviation incurring. This is most obvious of its reintegration, where that distance, the disparaging distance, is thus reintegrated. Yes. And it becomes as if there is no geographical distance. It is thus fixed in the process. However, this does not finalize the resolution, because once there is a deviation and there is disparaging distance, one is acclimated to that sense of distance, so that in the process to integrate, they need to afford in what way they have acclimated to that distancing measure, and in how it becomes integrated with the near proximity. It is not enough to simply position oneself in geographical nearness, for then that is disturbing the acclimation that was cared for henceforth. And instead, there is this integrating pattern in which the deviation is the disparaging distance and its full acclimation, and its integration is the slow process of both inhabiting the acclimated environment that they have proceeded onto, as well as in what way it can become integrated with near proximity. Thus, there is a cycle of integration. And too far in any spectrum, too far in the acquiescence to the center or the least distance of that environment would cause denigration of their acclimated process. It would not be a consideration of reacclimation, but rather denigration to what they have acclimated to. They have not truly become in proximity towards that distance, and instead have become unintegrated in both environments, attempting to do what their persona does not allow, since there was an acclimation already in the distance arena. That would be the first of the deviating factors. The third deviating factor would be constituted as intention. One might think that intention is somehow a property of the extension of whatever system they are attending to. If they are attending to produce, they are attending to participate, they are attending to become, all seemingly part of a process. But intention does have the embedded nature of its biological necessity imprinted, and such. All intention has a fundamental layer. We cannot take the psyche onto a journey of intention unless we have convinced of some biological property that can be accessed through such intention. Intention of work for the biological necessity. Intention to produce, to participate in a social environment for its biological properties that would be attended to. These subliminal biological necessities can be manifested if intention has been prolonged to a point where that manifestation takes effect. If one takes the intention on a journey, its destination is its biological tendencies. For example, if one intends to work to, and then follows that intention fully at one point or another, the biological tendencies that are latent behind that intention will manifest because the intention itself has no value other than its biological provision that would be promised at its destination end. When it does happen that the biological tendency takes effect, as though one believes or correlates that the modality of that intention is rather for the biological tendency, does not work itself, but rather provisions of biological necessity that become the paramount importance, then they have deviated from the intention, but more so they've deviated from the spectrum in which they participated. In the example of work, it is that they deviated from work, or the definition of work, or what it constitutes as for that biological necessity. They have platformed the biological necessity based on intention and have become a deviation of process. Because of this and that biological platforming, one is now following that necessity against the backdrop of in what way they are embedded in the modality of that intention, as well as the broader spectrum in which that intention takes place. Once a biological necessity is platformed through the modality of intention, they have actualized themselves according to that necessity. They are now dependent on that tendency for their furtherment of process, instead of the intention itself being what is the deciding factor. It is rather in what way biological tendency comes to effect. We find this in the way one becomes disturbed in their work, in which they've lost the intentionality of work to the biological tendency of such that it would be a loss of biological necessity if they did not attend, and that way platformed it as such to a point where this has become their paramount importance. It is not associated with the attention anymore, but rather with the biological necessity and in what way they move within that spectrum. One cannot simply reacclimate to the intention itself or to broader spectrums, because the platforming of that necessity has become a determinant factor of their continuance. They require attendance to that necessity, which is the biological mainframe of the individual, to then reassociate in what way it is embedded in the original intention. It is not only to define the intention itself, irrespective of the biological foundation, but also in what way they are in attendance of that biological extension. Episode we will discuss 3 more deviating factors and their cycle and orientation and integration to its broader spectrums. Thank you for listening. If you would like, rate the show, review it, or just keep listening and enjoy.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.